Good evening. Welcome to the first ever reverse slow chat. I am in the driver's seat tonight to the absolute horror of my guest, Topher Field. That's right, he's a guest on his own show. Full disclosure, this was a late night drunken idea on a Wednesday night. If you're ever wondering what Topher Field and Lady Liberty are up to, it's whiskey flights on a Wednesday night, D&Ms on a balcony with cigars and other things you can smoke. And this is the result. So thank you for letting me take over your show, Topher.
I'm quietly terrified. I'm sure we'll get there and talk about that, but I am just quietly terrified. I'm used to driving the car, not being a passenger.
This is like a dream. I am like, and I have to mention the man next on my other side, David Limbrick, MP, the Liberal Democratic member for Southeastern Metro, and also my boss. This is his office. He's let us take over. Hi, David. Thanks for trusting us and letting us be here in Parliament House.
I like doing all sorts of wild stuff. So, I let Topher come in and say hi, and I'm always happy for you to drive interviews, Kate. You always do a great job.
Thank you. So the reason why David's joined us for the first part of the show is because we want to know what made Topher a libertarian, and also what is the definition of a libertarian according to Topher Field. So Topher, what was your road to libertarianism, and what do you define libertarianism as for those who don't know?
Yeah, okay. How long have you got? No. So road to libertarianism, I was raised as a sort of Christian conservative. And as I say, and apologies for those who've already heard my bad jokes, they don't get any better. So just don't set your expectations very high. When I grew up with the Trinity, the Holy Trinity was God the Father, God the Son, and God the Johnny Howard. That was the family sort of, not that they intended it that way, but that in practice was kind of how it worked. And what actually started me down the road away from conservatism and towards libertarianism was the couple of years that I spent in the Army Reserve, because it was like the Wizard of Oz and Seen Behind the Curtain. It was like you finally meet the great Oz. The army is revered in conservative ideology and conservative thinking, and they're above reproach. And how dare the ABC be reporting on alleged war crimes and blah blah blah. Without commenting on any of the specifics of any of the cases, it's sort of there's this instinctive belief that the army is above reproach, and then you spend some time in their ranks, and it's very, very disillusioning. It really strips away the false beliefs very, very quickly. And that was the moment. I have this terrible analogy. Changing someone's mind or getting someone to change what they believe is very easy once you've broken them away from what they already believe. The hardest part is having them realize that what they already believe right now may not actually be correct. And that was that time in the army that made me go, what I believe right now may not actually be correct. And I give the analogy of collecting oysters off a pier or off a rock. You've got to crack it off that rock, but then chucking it in the bucket and driving it home in the boot of the car, that's easy. But cracking it off that rock takes some work. And that was my moment where I just got really cracked off that sort of Christian conservative rock. And then from there, my journey towards libertarianism, fundamentally a belief in freedom. You asked how I define libertarian. I have a bit of an unusual definition. People talk about the non-aggression principle or various other things like that. I define it very simply like this. It means that I believe in you. Simple as that. It means that I think you are better qualified to make decisions for your life than I am, and that David Limbrick, as an elected MP, all respect to him, but you're still better qualified to make your decisions for your life than what he is. It's as simple as that for me. I believe in you and the ability for you to make your decisions. And yes, you're going to make mistakes just like I do. But if we each experience the consequences of those mistakes at that individual level, then we all learn very quickly and we all figure it out very quickly. But when those decisions are being made by some sort of a central authority where they can make all the mistakes in the world, but they're not the ones that suffer, that's when we keep repeating mistakes. And we see that in the world today. So fundamentally, I believe in you.
That's beautiful. And I don't think I've ever asked you, David, how did you become a libertarian? Was there an issue or a moment or a person where it clicked?
I went through a journey similar to Topher, but from the other side. I was never a conservative. I have never been a conservative, and I'm unlikely to ever be a conservative. I actually came from the left of politics. And the thing that brought me away from that was actually the aftermath of September 11. That's what sort of sent me on that journey. I saw the response to that, the wars that were based on lies, the increasing surveillance state, massive state control, and we're still suffering from that, I think. And that's what set me off on that journey. And I didn't really get active, though, until probably around, I was following the Liberal Democrats for a long time, and following the wider pro-liberty, the wider libertarian movement throughout the world. And then I think it was around 2012, 13 that I joined the Liberal Democrats, and then became sort of active around 2013, 2014, decided that just sitting around and complaining about things isn't the right way to go. You have to take action in your own life and do something, and that's what it was. But I think the trigger was, it was September 11 and the response to that made me rethink everything.
Am I allowed to ask a question, or am I banned?
I'll give you 3 questions that you can ask tonight. So this is your first one.
I'm going to use my first one on you, Dave.
She's like a genie giving you 3 wishes.
3 wishes. For those that have come in late, I'm not in the driver's seat tonight. This isn't my interview. This is Kate's interview, so I have to not tread on her toes.
Don't tread on me.
Oh no,
yeah,
no, that's
tread on
right.
Kate. I wouldn't even think about
it.
That's
right. So, David, I'm actually really interested because a lot of that aftermath of 9/11 is actually blamed on conservatives, blamed on right-wing governments, Republicans in the US, John Howard here in Australia. And yet you took that as a signal that your more left-leaning views may not have been correct. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Well, a lot of people don't realize this, but the whole sort of neocon thing in the US is actually derived from the left.
Okay.
Like the Democratic Party, if you look at the history of neoconservatism, it comes from this sort of anti-communist thing in the Democratic Party. But in many ways, it's like Australia, right? In many ways, they're the same, right? They're all about increasing state control. I didn't see, it made me question the role of the state in people's lives.
Okay.
It made me question the role of the state fundamentally. And, I started reading books about economics and stuff like that. And that sort of led me away from the idea. I was like many people. I used to think that the government, if only we had people in government twisting the right buttons and pulling the right levers, everything would be perfect. And I got drawn away from that idea by the idea that people should be in control of their own lives. That ends up with the best outcomes. And centralizing power is very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous, and it's become more centralized. As we've seen recently, it's gone off the scales. But but I think that despite that origin, I think that having voices for liberty now is more important than ever. People like yourself who have, I think I said to you earlier that, I was watching your videos long before COVID and anything like that. And some of those things that you were championing then, like free speech, your free speech video, had a great effect on me because I thought you did a great job of presenting why it's important, and it was very, very, it was like a Nostradamus thing, really, because one of the things that you made, one of the points that you made in that video was that, and that really stuck with me, even though it's been years since I watched it, was that the people who've made big leaps, either, in technology or philosophy or whatever, they've always been outcasts at first, right? And we've seen so much of that recently where people who speak out against the status quo, they're not all right. There are some quacks out there. There's some crazy people out there. But then there's other people who speak out and maybe they're speaking the truth. And you made that point, right back to Galileo and even before, that there's been many people throughout history who at first were considered outcasts, crazy, heretics, quacks, whatever you want to call them. Cookers, you might call them cookers. You might, Galileo was probably, he would have been probably called a cooker, I reckon. Yeah, and the fact that some of these people, they discovered later, were telling sometimes it was after they died that they discovered that they were telling the truth. They never got justice in their own life. But this is why free speech is so important. We shouldn't silence people. We should let the market of ideas develop. We should let these things, evolve. It's an evolutionary process. And, hopefully if we have enough rational voices in there, the truth will emerge from that chaos. And, it has many times throughout history.
We were joking around before the show.
I've got to shut up.
We were joking around before the show that us three believed in freedom before it was cool. And Topher was getting cancelled before it was cool. And I don't know if you realise, but sitting on the couch are 3 lead Senate candidates for the Liberal Democrats from the recent federal election: WA, Tasmania, and Victoria. We're also proud that we ran in that election. Well, I know, Topher, we'll talk about that later.
I'm happy that I ran. We'll talk about it later.
Yes. Yeah. But I did want to ask you, so you've talked about how you became a libertarian. How did you come across the Liberal Democrats? Was it because of your friendship with Dr. John Humphreys, our founding father and president?
That came later. It was actually through a chap by the name of Tim Andrews, who's in the US now. Yeah. Absolute stellar bloke. Yes. Just a truly fine human.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Tim. If you're watching, if you watch this at some point in time. So, to our loss, to Australia's loss, he's gone to live in the US, at least for the time being. But he was instrumental in the whole sort of freedom movement, and his gift, I think, was in bringing people together. And he saw some of my videos, and he reached out to me. In fact, he actually gave a bit of money to that free speech video that you mentioned. I crowdfunded the budget for that, and he gave some budget to that. And he reached out to me, and he said, it's great to see another libertarian. And I said, another what?
Yeah.
And he really was the one that educated me. So I'd been on this journey since I'd spent time in the army, that I left the army because I just couldn't be a part of it anymore. I just realized all of my values were at odds, completely at odds with them as an organization. And so I left, and I entered a period of limbo. So this was, I think I was 22 years of age, maybe 23 years of age when I left the army. And I entered an extended period of limbo until I was in my late 20s, and I began working on doing videos to do with water issues, the mismanagement of water in the Murray-Darling Basin, mismanagement of water for here in Melbourne, bringing water over from Tasmania, all sorts of crazy stuff. I began there. And then I don't remember why, but I branched out into these other topics that were actually very, very dear to my heart. And it was the Finkelstein report under Julia Gillard at the time that proposed a thing called the News Media Council, where the government were, in the words of Jacinda Ardern, we're going to be your single source of truth. And the government were going to get to decide what was acceptable and what was not.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying. And this was, I think it was 2014 or something like that. I don't recall exactly. And so I crowdfunded the budget for that video, and I was able to make what is an entertaining video. It holds up well now. 8 years later,
better than ever.
It holds up. Yeah, in a way, it's actually aging. It's aging really well. And that was the video that Tim Andrews then saw, and he's the one who really actually helped me to put a language around what it was that I'd slowly been becoming in my own time, just thinking things through and trying to figure out what I really believed.
We've got quite a few people watching. So hello, if you've just joined us, I'm Lady Liberty, and I've taken over Topher Field's interview show. This is the Reverse Slow Chat. We do have David Limbrick on the couch with us, who is the Liberal Democrat representative for Southeastern Metro. It would be remiss of me not to mention we have a state election just around the corner.
It's true.
So, Topher, you're not running as a candidate this time.
No.
Is there a reason why you didn't want to run? Did we ask you to run? I apologise if that was an oversight. But after the federal election, I think we both needed a break.
I was asked, but I think the person asking me already knew that the answer was a foregone conclusion. They were asking me as a formality so they could cross my name off a list. Look, I've been asked ever since I started doing videos all the way back in 2009. I've actually been being asked to run as a candidate for various parties at basically every federal and every state election, sometimes multiple. I was asked prior to the federal election and prior to being asked by the Liberal Democrats, I was offered the lead Senate position of another party that I would define as being in the broad freedom-friendly minor party camp. It was a winnable position, lead Senate candidate position in Victoria for a party that was winnable. And I knocked them back because I have no ambition to be in politics. It's not actually what I want to do. You might want to block your ears for a second, David, but I actually want to do something useful with my life.
Oh, right. Well, you know.
And we're reluctant political candidates.
And especially being someone who loves freedom in politics, in Australia, it's very much a defensive action. You can do good in the world by reducing the amount of harm that gets done. And if you're wired that way, then good, fantastic, good on you. I'm not wired that way. I want to be on the front foot, proactively, actively making the world a better place as much as I can. So I'd said no over and over and over again. And I've been asked a few times to run for the Lib Dems in sort of unwinnable positions, second, third, fourth on Senate tickets or various things over the years. And then I was asked to run for Tasmania. And
you should be Premier of Victoria, Topher.
No, there's too much paperwork. No, thank you. This guy over here, I nominate him.
He can't be Premier from the upper house. So.
Oh, well, that's a shame. We can't see what that emoji was. Sorry.
I think it's the 100 sign.
I have no idea.
Or the fire.
So anyway, they asked me, Liberal Democrats asked me to run for the Senate in Tassie for the federal election. I said no. They came back and asked me again. I said no. They came back and asked me a third time and basically said, look, we've got some amazing people down in Tassie, but none of them are in a position where they can be our lead Senate candidate. We're in a position where we're going to end up putting someone in that position who's maybe not a truly freedom-loving person. And if lightning strikes and they happen to win, that could really come back and bite us. So they've got some amazing people in Tassie, but just through life circumstance and who they work for or various other things like that, they just couldn't be the one to put their hand up and go first on that ticket. So I said, okay, fine. And Tassie's an amazing part of the world. And if I'd won, I would have moved there in a heartbeat. I'd be very, very happy to move my family there and raise my kids there. I think it's a fantastic place. As circumstance would have it, and somewhat predictably, I didn't win. But what I learned through that journey, and that was an interesting part of my life that we'll probably get to a little bit later anyway, but through that journey, I realized I was right to say no in the first place. That I think I can actually move the needle more as a commentator, as someone who's drawing attention to people who are saying and doing the right things, than I can as someone who's trying to draw attention to a specific district, a state, an upper house area, a lower house area. I think that limits my reach and limits the amount that I can move the needle.
The feedback that I had, because I was the lead Senate candidate for Western Australia, and I'm so excited that I'm sitting on the couch with these two gentlemen, and just being on the ticket with them is something I'm very proud of. I feel sometimes like I wake up every day thinking, is this really my life? So I'm very grateful to be here. And some of the feedback that I got about you as a candidate is you seem like a genuine person. You've come to the party, you've got the values and principles that drive us, and you just come across as a humble, genuine, beautiful soul.
Well, you know what they say, once you can fake sincerity, you've got it made.
Fake it till you make it?
So,
I don't believe that you're faking it.
I don't believe you're faking it.
No.
Look, it would be hard to fake it for this many years. I wonder about some of the people that have just come up in the last 2 years. That's a different story. But I think once you've been in it for 10 plus years, I think it's people know who you are.
Yes.
By then.
Yes. And something that I know we've discussed is we get a little bit protective about our party because we were doing this before it was cool. We did this before the pandemic. We had these principles and these beliefs. So we welcome everyone with open arms to the Liberal Democrats and the libertarian movement in Australia. But we do have a little bit of concern sometimes. We just want to make sure you're in it for the right reasons and you have those principles that we have. So, David, I just wanted to ask you a quick question about your campaign. So we've got about 4 weeks to go now, I think. I've come over to help and I'm honoured to be here.
Thank you for coming. We need all the help we can get.
What do you think is going to happen? I know we don't like talking about predictions, but how are you feeling about your campaign?
Look, it's been great. We've met lots of people who are supporters. I've gone out, done every sort of type of campaigning that you can imagine, handing out things at the supermarket, going into media, doing social media, meeting volunteers. We've got advertising, billboards up all over the southeast now, giving signs to people, going around and meeting people. I think the thing that is really striking over the last couple of years is, and really encouraging is the number of people that have become engaged in politics who weren't engaged at all before. Though I'm sure you would have noticed this as well with your audience. And that's a good thing. that's a really good thing. Like most of the people that I've engaged with that have become supporters of the party, there's a few people that used to be supporters of other parties. Most of them have never really been involved in politics at all, which is a really good thing. I think my explanation for that is that people, if government is doing its job well, it shouldn't get in people's lives and they shouldn't be thinking about the government, right? The government should just be something far away in the background. But people have had the government intrude into their lives. Everyone's had their liberty taken away from them to some degree. And they've looked around and they've said, who is actually defending liberty? And to our, very happily, people noticed that we weren't just defending liberty now, we've been defending it for a long time. I know both of you have been defenders of liberty well before the pandemic, but we just kept doing what we were doing and people noticed. People noticed. They noticed you, they noticed you, they noticed me. Yeah, they noticed. Because for a very long time, people didn't care.
It's a thankless task.
People didn't care. People didn't care. And so it's good that people care about that now. Now, we need to entrench that idea because the pandemic is a symptom of a wider problem.
Yes.
And that wider problem is government overreach, something that we've known well before the pandemic and will continue after the pandemic. It'll continue after Daniel Andrews is gone. He'll eventually go one way or another. It'll continue after, it'll continue whether the Liberal or Labor Party win the election. This is something that we need to entrench, the idea that there needs to be voices that are pro-liberty in Victoria and throughout the nation.
This problem existed before I was born, and it's going to continue long after I'm dead. It's just my job to do my bit while I'm here. That's how I see it.
Is there anything else you'd like to ask David while he's on the couch? Remember, you only have 2 questions left for the duration of the show.
I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to take that as a comment in true Q&A style. No, I just want to publicly thank you, David, because I don't actually think I really have, apart from maybe on a slow chat a long time ago. You were one of the first people that I came across. So I began speaking out to do with all the lockdowns and everything in March of 2020, literally within weeks. I had the data from overseas and I started to say, hey, this is not a proportionate response. And thus began one of the loneliest periods of my life. It's been a real roller coaster since then. And there were other people speaking out early, Gideon Rosner being very notable, but I didn't come across him at the time. And so I felt very, very alone. There were others as well, but I was in my own little silo and I didn't know of anyone else. And you were one of the very first that I came across. And to see an MP with all of that to lose, actually being willing to stick their neck out and say, no, these are my principles. This is what I stand for. And I stand for it even when I know it's going to be unpopular. There is like a breath of fresh air doesn't even come close to expressing what that was. It was soul food for me. And I just want to thank you and Tim as well. But for actually being willing to do that, because there are so many others that were in positions of prominence and could have spoken out and knew that they should have been speaking out, but they ducked for cover instead.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to hear that. But it's no big deal for me to support unpopular ideas, as I'm sure Tim and I discussed it right from the start. Like, we don't like emergency powers. We know the history of emergency powers. You guys know all about the history of emergency powers and how awful they are. So we knew at some point we would have to push back, and it was fairly early. I think we were the first political party to push back against it. I was pushing back against, the first thing I was pushing back against actually was school closures, because I could very clearly see the effects of that, and we were pushing back hard against that by April 2020. But then there was many other issues that happened later. But we need other voices doing this, and there wasn't many voices. We got surprisingly little surprisingly few people attacking us. I know that people attacked you, and I know that people attacked Gideon really bad when he came out. I think it was in April. We didn't get it as much. I'm not sure the reasons for that, but
just be grateful and then move on.
Yeah. Like they attacked us later.
Yeah.
I think maybe because we were having an effect, and but we always tried to make sure that everything that we were arguing, we were doing on principle and talking about people's rights. We didn't get involved in discussions around science and this sort of thing. We were just talking about rights and whether what the government is doing is proportionate. So, like lots of people early on, this was an interesting thing. When vaccines first came out, we had lots of people contact us about that. And we had we didn't mind it, like, because we were saying to people, well, it's voluntary, don't have it then. And like, there's nothing to discuss. Because the only real thing from our point of view, the only real political issue is it a person's choice? Is it freely, is it a free choice for these people or not? If it's a free choice, then we're okay. And if it's not a free choice, then we're not okay with it. And we think that way with most things, right? Things should be about choices.
Well, thank you for letting us take over your office.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna get out of this chat in a minute because I'm gonna let you guys carry on, but I'll be close by, and I might.
Don't try and censor us, please.
No, I won't try and censor. Well, I can censor you just by pulling the power cord out.
He's our chaperone for the evening.
Yeah.
Just got to keep an eye on the kids.
We can't be trusted by ourselves, as last night showed. So.
And we were. Hang on, Ash was there. We weren't by ourselves.
Yes, we're blaming Ash.
Yeah,
for that.
we are absolutely
and thanks for
blaming
the wine
Ash
tonight. So at the moment, we're drinking red wine provided by Ash because he left it in the office. Ash, of course, is the state president of the Liberal Democrats. And hi, if you're watching. But thank you, David, and thanks for everything that you do. Topher and I are really big fans. And
I'm big fans of you guys too. So there you go.
Thanks, David.
Feelings mutual. All right, I will get off the couch and you can rearrange yourselves.
Okay, thank you.
Spread out a little bit, not have to be quite so crammed in.
Time to have some whiskey.
Is it? Oh, yes. Okay. Well, I've finished the Pinot Noir. Now, someone was asking the big questions earlier. I saw the question about what the wine actually was. David, could you pass us the bottle, please? Because this is a question that's important to answer. Wow, L'Artiste Tumbarumba Pinot Noir. That's going to slide off. And fall.
My goodness, thank you. I'm just so excited.
There you go. That's what we were drinking. Now, I reckon I'm a big fan of the Oban, so I'm going to finish with the Oban. Are you happy to start with the?
Yes, I'm happy to share.
All right.
After work today, I went to the Bottle-O and I was thinking, I really need to impress Topher. What whiskey can I get? What whiskey shall I provide for Topher Field tonight? It was a very interesting moment for me in the bottle shop, and I hope I've made the right choice. So,
a Starwood Twofold is a very, very good choice indeed.
Well, because I'm in Melbourne, I thought when in Melbourne, I would buy a Melbourne whiskey. So that's what we're having. And cheers again for the red ash. So... Topher.
Yes.
Back in April 2020, you went to a park. A long
time ago, yeah.
You went to a park.
Yes, I did.
On Anzac Day, and you gave a speech. Why did you choose Anzac Day, and why did you think it was appropriate at the start of the pandemic to stage a protest that early?
Yeah, so I didn't actually organise the protest. Both the location being in Trafalgar to the southeast of Melbourne and the date were chosen by somebody else. Now, that's not to say I disagree with the date, but just to say, personally, I wouldn't have picked it. Okay? I would have picked the weekend after.
Yeah.
All right. Or the other day of the weekend. Is
that because it's a very sacred day for Australians?
Yes, I just wouldn't have conflated those two issues, even though I do think there is reason to. And in my speech on that day, I talked about that. That fundamentally, Australian forces throughout the ages have always fought the same enemy. It's always been the idea that the people can be made to serve the government. If you look at Kaiser Wilhelm's Germany in World War I, you look at the Japanese imperialism in World War II, you look at all the various entanglements that we've been wrapped up in since, whether for better or for worse, we've consistently been fighting against governments that want to have a level of total control over their citizens. That's been our enemy. And what Daniel Andrews did by basically arbitrarily depriving every one of their basic human rights. Now, by that I mean the right to the ownership of their own property. If you own some property, it's yours, you get to use it. And to lock business owners out of their businesses, to shut people down, is to deprive them of basic property rights. These are human rights. To lock people in their homes is to deprive people of the right to actually be able to move around, to go and see people, to gather, to, and this was the ban on protest, the de facto ban on protest, because you had to have an excuse to leave your home. There is no more important time to protest than when your government says you can't. Like, honestly, if that doesn't get you on your feet, then nothing will. And you will sit at home until you've lost all of your rights. The moment the government says, I'm sorry, right now is not an appropriate time for protests, that's when you need to be on your feet. So I was invited, someone reached out to me. So in March, I'd released a video in which I volunteered to be infected with the coronavirus. It sounds like clickbait. It's not. It makes perfect sense if you think about it. Relatively young, relatively healthy people being voluntarily infected in order to gain immunity would have provided very quickly and relatively cheaply a high level of herd immunity to protect those who are older and those who are vulnerable. So I put that video out in March. Someone saw that video and said, hey, I'm organizing a protest. It's going to be on Anzac Day. It's going to be in Trafalgar. Would you come and be the main speaker for us? And I said yes. And that was an interesting moment for me, because that was the first time in my life, having grown up as this good little Christian conservative, that I walked out my door with the intention, with the premeditated intention, I am going to go and break the law, such as the law was. It's not really the law, but you get what I mean. I'm going to walk out my front door and put myself into a position where I'm going to have a negative interaction with the cops. I'm going to have I've had a great relationship with the cops over my entire life, with one exception when I was younger, but that wasn't my fault. That was the cop. I've had a great relationship with them. And now I'm walking out my front door going, okay. And we had very little information to go on at the time, because we didn't know whether we were going to get arrested. We didn't know. It was all completely unknown. As far as I'm aware, that was the first formally organised protest gathering against lockdowns in Australia. And we just went there and like, okay, let's just suck it and see. I live streamed that onto my Facebook page, and it quickly racked up over 100,000 views. There was such an appetite of people that just wanted to see someone do something. And of course, that attracted an enormous amount of blowback, an enormous amount of negativity. A lot of people were upset about the date. And I don't disagree with the date, but I do understand why they would see it that way. And like I said, I wouldn't have chosen that date, but I don't disagree with it. But I do understand why they'd be upset. But a lot of people were just upset because we were standing up. And they just wanted everyone to just go inside your house, shut the doors, shut the windows, keep out the dreaded Rona, do as you're told. And this really was a really strong instinct for a lot of people.
Well, fast forward 2 years in Anzac Day 2022 in WA, one of the lower house candidates for us went and protested because in WA they were only letting 100 people gather at the War Memorial to commemorate Anzac Day. And this Stephen McKenna was the candidate for the Lib Dems, and he's a forming serving officer like yourself, and he wouldn't have a bar of it. Like an invite-only Anzac Day outside in April 2022. It was this year. So, yeah.
I was only an enlisted man, and I was only reserves. But yes, it's frustrating, and I know people who are combat veterans, and combat veterans, I find, are an incredibly diverse bunch, but one thing that seems to unite them is an immense sense of humility and a desire not to create trouble. They become very measured, very controlled, very willing to cop a lot on the chin. And so a lot of them were just kind of saying, well, this is wrong, but they were taking a step back. And then by late 2020 and the middle of 2021, we had a significant number of former and even some current service members in our ranks in the protests, and amongst them, numerous combat veterans in our ranks. And so when the RSL stands up and goes, oh, it's disrespectful to go to the shrine, I get so angry, as if they can, as a single voice, express the views of the entire diversity of combat veterans and service veterans, and speak for them all and dismiss the ones that are standing there going, no, this is wrong. It's yeah.
So just going back to Anzac Day, April 2020, was there ever a moment when you thought, I shouldn't be doing this?
Oh, yeah. So I parked the car, grabbed my phone. I'm getting ready to live stream. It's just one click away. I've got the title put in, blah, blah, blah. It's just one click away to start live streaming. And I'm walking towards where the park is. And I sort of lift my eyes up and I look. There's 6 cop cars and 12 cops already Like the thing hasn't even started yet. And I can't really see much of a crowd at all. And the thought crossed my mind, if you just don't push this button to go live and you get back in the car and you drive home, no one will ever know.
Do you regret pushing that button?
No. Not even, no. Not. Honestly, this last 2.5 years of my life, in amongst there's been some really low times, but there's been moments that I will carry with me for the rest of my days. And you can get me emotional. Stop it.
Not yet, Topher. You have to at least finish one glass of whiskey before you can get emotional.
So I think every single human being, we read history, we learn history in school or through our own interests, etc. And we look at these people and go, wow, they were faced with a test and they passed. You know, they passed with flying colors, or they failed, right? And we always inevitably, sooner or later, we ask ourselves the question, am I going to pass or am I going to fail? And in a very real sense for me, and it's very much unfinished business, and I'm working through all kinds of shit. But I feel like the last 2.5 years for me, my test finally came. And honestly, without any ego at all, I just sit here and go, I passed.
You passed with flying colours, Topher.
And that is just the most amazing sense to carry with you on a day-by-day basis. It really fucks with your head, quite honestly. And just to sit there and go, I was there as history was being made. It just so happens I lived in the city that became the most locked down in the world. And it just so happens I was among the first to speak up. And it just so happens that I'm among the most prominent to have spoken up. I'm in this small club of people that were targeted for incitement charges because of our online activity and our advocacy for human rights. For reasons that I don't really fully understand, I find myself standing in a very small group. And that feels amazing. No, I don't regret pressing that button, not for a second.
So after that moment in time, did you think it could get worse?
I used to laugh at the people that were like, oh, there'll be the army on the streets. Oh, they'll do this, they'll do that. And I would roll my eyes and go, oh, come on, guys, settle down. It's not going to be that bad. And then one by one, it all freaking came true. And I had to eat my words over and over again because the people that were predicting the worst kept being proven right. Another case in point, slightly different example, but when the conspiracy theory came out that the virus emerged from the Wuhan lab, I was like, guys, seriously, do we need this noise, right? We know that bats can transfer from animals to humans. It's happened before. There's no reason to think it didn't happen this time. We don't need the conspiracy theory. We don't need kind of like the whiff of racism around this. Like, can we just focus on the problem? Well, it turns out they were right. You know, and I was wrong. But I have been wrong far more often as a result of being too cautious and too optimistic than wrong by taking it too far. It's been such a bizarre time. The conspiracy theorists, now obviously there's a lot of conspiracies out there that are nonsense, but in relation to the political response to COVID and what the government was going to do, vaccine mandates, case in point. The minute the vaccine was developed, all of a sudden there were people out there saying, no vaccine mandates, no mandatory vaccines. I rolled my eyes again. I'll put my hand up and say, hey, I got that one wrong. I genuinely didn't think the government would go there.
Well, that's because the government has so many things it can do before it mandates something. But they went straight there. They went straight there.
Yeah.
So after you got home on Anzac Day, April 2020, what did you do next?
To be honest, I was very much an island at that point in time. The movement hadn't started. I mean, a movement is not a group of individuals acting independently. A movement is a group of individuals acting together. And what was happening at that time, I was by no means the only one, but we were all still isolated. We were all still just doing our own individual thing, and we really hadn't started to find each other yet. And it was in the months that followed. It took until around about September of that year before I would say we actually formed something that could be described as a movement and began to have protests that had significant numbers of people showing up. And the early days were pretty scary. The real violence hadn't happened yet, but we all had a sense that it could. But it was pretty scary in the sense of no one knew who to trust. No one had track record. And we ended up with a really unfortunate situation where different protest groups trying to organize protests weren't trusting each other, and they were actually competing and even sabotaging each other. And I got caught up in some misinformation and ended up in the wrong place on the day when the protest happened at the Queen Victoria Market. I got the wrong end of the stick, and I'm down in jolly Chapel Street, you know, and I had to leg it up to Queen Vic Market, and you know, it was just confusion everywhere, and these groups were working against each other. But over time, slowly, the paranoia kind of gave way to trust as people sort of built a track record, and we slowly came together as a movement. And what we saw by the end of 2021, by November 2021, I mean, all of these groups were just championing each other and supporting each other's events and advertising it, and just we really formed, I think, one of the most amazing movements in Melbourne political history.
I want to ask about the protest, because I attended protest in Western Australia. I was at the front of McGowan's office in West Perth protesting when it was only a handful of people. I could have lost my job because I was working in a job that wouldn't let me do that at the time, but I did it anyway. And I also spoke at some of these rallies. How important do you think those kind of gatherings are for the cause, but also for you personally?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think they were vital. I think the minute the government says you're not allowed to protest, you have to get on your feet, you have to protest. And if you don't, it says really bad things and emboldens and empowers the person who's trying to take away your rights. So I think it was essential. We had to do it, and we did. We didn't have enough numbers to start with, but we just persevered, and there were a few hundred to a few thousand people that just showed up over and over and over again and took that risk. Arrests and you know, being pepper sprayed and hit with batons, and then ultimately towards the end it was the rubber bullets as well. But there had been violence all the way throughout, but they just kept showing up because they knew that it was wrong for the government to say you're not allowed to protest. I think it was critical at that point. I think it became less critical once the government actually stopped cracking down. I think the protests were, I think it was important that we had that catharsis, that moment where we had a couple 100,000 people on the streets in November 20th, 2021. Amazing day, one of the greatest days of my life, and that was just phenomenal. But really, the protests were at their most important when they weren't legal. But the other thing that happened was psychologically and emotionally, you've got all of these people who feel alone because they've been isolated physically. They're trapped in their homes. They're stuck. But then they also feel isolated emotionally and psychologically because Daniel Andrews is on the TV every day, marginalizing them and their views and calling them all kinds of conspiracy theorists, etc., and implying that there's like just a handful of these people. And then they physically go somewhere and they see a couple of thousand other people that had the guts to go somewhere and do what they did. And psychologically, I think it was incredibly powerful and empowering, and I think really good from a mental health point of view for a lot of the people that showed up.
So why was the November 20 protest one of the best days of your life?
November 20, 2021, my wife was there with me, and afterwards I said to her that it was the best day of my life. I'm sorry, it was better than my wedding day. And she said, yeah, no problem. I agree. That was better than my wedding. It was just one of the greatest days. So to put it in context, so November 20 was when sort of everyone finally realized the police aren't cracking heads anymore. They've finally actually started to back off and respect human rights and allow us to express our political views in relation to what Daniel Andrews has done. And there was just this groundswell of people. And for me personally, it was even more profound because I'd been arrested not long before that, and the bail conditions were that I had to obey the chose orders, and I didn't want to get arrested for breach of bail and end up in prison for no reason when I got 2 kids to look after. So I stopped going to protests at that point. I focused on making Battleground Melbourne. And so we were filming Battleground Melbourne while the world was sort of changing around us. The police backed off, and we were just sort of writing and rewriting Battleground Melbourne and the ending, and we didn't even know what the ending was going to be at that point. But I'm in the studio filming, and I notice, obviously, that the police had backed off. So I got in touch with my bail officer, and I said, does this mean that they're legal, and therefore it's not a breach of the chose orders, and therefore I can go? And he said, yes, you can. So I got in touch with the organisers, who I'd gotten to know over the previous 2 years. And I said, listen, do you mind if I bring a film crew? I want to get one of these for the doco. And they said, yes, bring a film crew, but would you speak as well? Would you be one of the speakers? And I said, okay, sure. So I got up there with a speech, and I always write my speeches. I in my opinion, that's the respectful way to do it rather than talking off the top of your head. I think you write it down, you make sure you keep it short, you keep it focused. And so I write my speeches down. I had that. And I remember gathering in front of Parliament House. I mean, we're in Parliament House now. It was literally just 100 metres that way. And the crowd was thick. It was full on. You could feel that this was going to be an amazing day. And this is my first protest in a while. This is my first protest in months. Okay, the last protest I was at, people were getting shot. So I show up here with a crew, getting shots, filming, all the rest of it, and we start marching. And I thought we were towards the back of the. I thought we were towards the front of the crowd. And we marched all the way through the city, and we marched up to the Flagstaff Gardens, which is on the northwest of the city. And I came over the crest of a hill as you enter the gardens. It's like a basin in front of you. And I felt a physical shot of adrenaline, a physical shock, as I saw the basin was already half full. There were tens of thousands of people already in the park. And I thought we were towards the front. And I have drone footage. So there's a particular vehicle that was traveling, and through the location of that vehicle, we can synchronize the drone footage of the park, and then a different drone that took footage, and a person walking along with a GoPro and a stick, who walked backwards all the way through the protest. And that's where you can count hundreds of thousands of people. There were hundreds of thousands of people. You can count them. And I realized that when we arrived at the park, there were still people leaving Parliament House. And there were already tens upon tens of thousands of people in the park, not to mention all the tens of thousands of people in the streets. And then I had just this incredible privilege of being one of the people who got to speak to that group. And it just gives me goosebumps even thinking, who gets to do that? And why? I didn't deserve any of that, but just to stand there and it's sort of being echoed again now with all of the cinema showings with Battleground Melbourne. I get to be the one that stands down the front and looks back at all these beautiful faces looking at me from the seats. How come I get to be that guy? It doesn't seem fair. It doesn't make sense to me, but here I am. And I just had this moment where I got to deliver a speech, having been there at the very first with 70 people. I got to be there, a year and a half later with hundreds of thousands of people. And I got to speak at both. And it blows my mind. It does. It blows my mind.
I want to take you back to the start of the pandemic just for a moment and how much worse that it got. How did it feel for you? Can you tell us a little bit about your personal experience with the pandemic? Because, we hear my experience in Western Australia. I couldn't travel across the border in my own country to see my family for the better part of 2 years. And then I had to decide if I wanted to see them, I had to get injected. So I have 2 tattoos on me, liberty and family, and I had to decide. So now I'm going to cry. But what was it like for you? And do you think you pulled through okay?
I'm carrying a lot of battle damage. Anyone that follows me knows that. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I try and pretend to be something that I'm not. I'm carrying a lot of battle damage, but I'm not the only one. I'm not. That's not a sympathy plea. There's a lot of people carrying damage. What was it like for me? In some respects, we were incredibly lucky because my wife's business was already set up to earn online, and I was primarily looking after the kids and then doing the Topher stuff on the side because that doesn't pay the bills. I don't make money out of that. I'm trying to now, but back then I wasn't even trying to. And so that was a hobby while I also looked after the kids, and my wife's a mortgage broker, and she'd already set the business up to operate online and do everything online. So we were incredibly fortunate, and we were not devastated nearly to the same degree as some people were, right? It was not as hard for us. But then there was the other side of it that I'm not someone who can walk past a fight I can some, but there are some fights I just can't walk past. And for the same reason why I got involved in water policy back in 2009, why me? I don't know. I just saw it and it was wrong and I spoke up about it. And it was the same with the pandemic. And I just wasn't willing to just put my head down. And I lost a lot of followers in the early days. Now, it's never been about followers for me. I've been doing it for 12 years. I've put forward all kinds of unpopular opinions that have cost me followers and blah, blah, blah. I only had about 10,000 people on my Facebook page at the start of the pandemic. And when I went and spoke at that protest, I probably lost about half of them. because these were good salt of the earth, conservative farmer type people who followed me because of my work on water. And you got all these people saying, "Oh, I used to like you, but you've gone off the right. I used to respect you. I used to think that you were smart." I'm like, well, I haven't changed. So the truth is, you didn't think I was smart. You liked me because you heard your thoughts come out of my mouth. That's why. It was not you. There was no respect there. I just said what you wanted to hear. And so I just had to cop that on the chin. Okay, that's fine, whatever. It's never been about the numbers for me, so it really didn't bother me at that sort of numbers level. It didn't bother me. And then slowly, sort of the people who hate what you do react very quickly. The people who love what you do react a bit more slowly. And so over a few weeks, I began to notice, my page is actually really starting to grow now. And that's a bit weird. I wonder why. And sure enough, it was people who were just looking for a voice. They were just looking for someone who, the most common thing people say to me is, "Thank you for making me feel like I wasn't crazy." That's what they were looking for. They were looking for someone who could make them realize that they weren't insane, because we were all being gaslit. We were all being lied to. This is about the science. We're being transparent, blah, blah, blah. There was no science to see. We couldn't see the science. Maybe it exists. We never saw it. Certainly wasn't transparent. We were just being lied to constantly all the way through this, and people just wanted to know that they weren't crazy. And they found me and others, David Limbrick and others obviously being very prominent in that as well. So then came the sort of what was the hard part for me. So financially, we were lucky. We were better than most. Our living situation wasn't harmed all that much. I took the kids to the playground anyway, even when they were closed. I just refused to obey that nonsense. So there were many areas in which we were kind of insulated, either by our choices or by happenstance, good fortune. But then, as the pressure kind of amped up, and I began to speak out more, and the police began knocking on the front door, I began to realize sooner or later I'm going to be arrested. I began to have people reaching out to me and needing someone to talk to, needing someone to tell their story. And someone's desperate when they're reaching out to some rando social media political commentator. Like, you've exhausted all other options at that point, right? No one's reaching out to me as a first port of call.
That's a huge burden to carry, though. Because I had that as well.
Yeah, and I know David's office, Steve, and I'm certainly not the only one. You're not wrong.
And we want to help. We're empaths.
Yeah,
we want to help people. So, but it does take its toll.
Well, I ended up at its worst. I had to get away from the family while I was checking people's messages, because it was just too much, and I didn't want to. A burden shared is a burden halved. Okay, great, but at the same time, it's not their burden to carry. These people are reaching out to me, and I don't want to put that on my family. So I made the choice that I would read this stuff while I was sitting in the garage, and I would light up a cigar and I'd grab a bottle of whiskey, and I would sit and I would read, and I wanted to reply, because these people are at the end of their rope. Why else are they talking to me? And I wanted to kind of be there for them and just be there to say, hey, you're not crazy. You can get through this. And I would just end up sitting there for hours, sometimes until 2, 3, 4 in the morning, depending on how stacked my inbox was. Just trying to figure out, how do you say to somebody, hang in there, without lying, without selling false hope, without the glib sort of stuff. Like, how do you say hang in there to someone who's like, my wife's left me, she's taken the kids, I've lost my job, I've got no way of supporting myself, fentanyl aren't going to touch me. I've been declared non-essential. I'm a complete waste of oxygen as a human being, according to the government. And everyone in my life says I'm crazy. And you read that and you go, okay, this person needs a reply, but what the fuck do I say?
I think the reply just a reply from Topher would have lightened their day. And
well, look, I hope so. And so that was many months on end. And I drank a lot. I literally, in 12 months, I literally drank more alcohol than I had drunk in the entire rest of my life combined. And it was just trying to deal with that aspect of it specifically. And I don't think I realized until much later just how much that had affected me. It wasn't until earlier this year that I went, oh, I'm not okay. All the way through that, I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm in a good place. I'm good. while I'm sitting there crying and trying to type to people while I'm smashed on a bottle of whiskey at 4 o'clock in the morning because I'm just trying to make sure I reply to everybody so that they wake up the next morning instead of the alternative. Like, yeah, it was a hell of a time.
I want to ask you about something else that happened to you during that period. You said before, I called up my bail officer. Did you ever think you would say that in your life? Did you ever think you would have a bail officer?
Yes.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yes. So I have believed for a very long time that sooner or later I'm going to get arrested for what I do.
In Australia?
Yes, in Australia. I've been very aware of the direction that we're heading in since before I started making videos. And I said it to my wife before we got engaged. I was like, you need to know sooner or later it's going to happen in Australia.
Well, at least you're self-aware.
And not because I've actually done anything wrong, but just because I can see the direction we're heading in, and I know myself, and there is going to be a fight sooner or later that I'm not willing to walk past and pretend I didn't see. That is going to put me in a position where I'm going to be arrested.
And it was the pandemic.
Turns out it was a pandemic. Now, I've only halfway fulfilled that prediction because I didn't actually spend time in prison. I was sort of catch and release. It was the Rex Hunt. They caught me, kissed me, and let me go. But hopefully I never do actually fulfill that prediction. But no, I think it's been very obvious for other people that have been following it for longer, it's been obvious for 50 plus years that we're heading in that direction where simply saying to the government, no, I think you're wrong, is being criminalized bit by bit.
So what was it like that day when you answered the door and there were police standing there?
Well, I didn't answer the door. We had a system in the house because I was well aware sooner or later it was going to happen. It was sort of very difficult to try and get on with normal life and not be sort of hyper vigilant. I wasn't sleeping very well at all, so I'd be up until whatever time of the morning replying to people, and then at 5 or 6 in the morning I would have had 2, maybe 3 hours sleep, and then someone's car door would close outside and I would just be instantly wide awake because the police love to come first thing in the morning, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. They'll come and kick your door in while you're still asleep. So that was my expectation, was that that's how it was going to go down. But any knock on the door, any car pulling up, anything, just instantly the thought goes through your head. You're like, okay, well, is this going to be it? And so we had to teach my son not to go to the door when there was a knock, because we'd seen the way they arrested some people. They bashed people's doors in with the entry rams. Not now, obviously not all the cops have done that, but it has happened. And I don't know in advance what's going to happen in my case. I don't want my son anywhere near that door. So we had to train him to go to the back of the house, and I would get my phone and get it ready to start streaming to my Facebook page so that whatever happened, whatever went down, there was going to be a record out in public immediately. And then my wife would be the one to actually look through the window and then answer the door, assuming it was safe to do so. And by safe, I don't mean if it's the cops, it's not safe. I mean, if the cops are stacked up with a SWAT team, at that point, just back away from the door, But we actually had to have these conversations and actually be thinking about, what does a political commentator turned human rights activist, what does his household do when there's an unknown knock at the door?
So you've just said that you had to teach your son not to answer the door.
Yeah.
Did you ever think you would be at that point in your life?
That one, the specifics of it were very much new and foreign and painful. I knew, obviously, like I just said, I expected I'd get arrested someday. I expected to go to prison for what I do. That's okay. I'd come to terms with that. But then when you zoom in and you really look at what that means on a day-to-day level, I'm keeping backups of my phone off-site so that I've got all my text messages and contacts, because if the cops come, they're going to take all my electronics, possibly all of my wife's electronics. They'll just go through the whole house and take every single thing, and they'll just keep it for months or years. And that's just how they roll. Having to really start thinking like a drug lord, having to start thinking like an actual organized crime boss, and going, okay, what evidence am I leaving lying around? How would I continue life in the event that I was out on parole, but they kept all of my electronics? How would life continue for my family in the event that they wouldn't give me bail? Not on parole, sorry, out on bail. What if they don't give me bail? What does that look like for the family? And having to think through all of this. And we had a 4-page document that just sort of laid out all the different contingencies in the event of this, then that, in the event of that, then the other,
To me, that is shocking because I grew up in regional South Australia and we were taught answer the door as quick as you can, let them inside, get them a drink. And the fact that you've had to teach your son to not answer the door is devastating. And another thing, in the country, I had a bushfire plan. So in the event of a bushfire, this is what you do. You had a plan for if the police came, if you were arrested. Did you ever think you would be in this position in your life?
The specifics were confronting for me. I knew that sooner or later it would happen, but I hadn't sort of thought through what that meant really at that individual level, and especially at that psychological level, what it's like to actually know that you're on a list somewhere, but you don't know which day your name reaches the top of that list. And that took months. And honestly, by the time the arrest happened, it was actually just a relief. I was actually just like, oh, finally, I can face whatever it is they throw my way. I wasn't sure if they're going to do to me what they did to Monica. Absurd bail conditions, which I couldn't accept. I end up in prison for who knows how long, blah, blah, blah. I was willing to do that. I was mentally prepared. My family was prepared. Psychologically, I was ready to go. But thankfully, I actually had the nicest officers and the mildest bail conditions you could possibly imagine. So yeah, I didn't even spend one night in prison. But to even say that, I didn't even have to spend one night in prison for being a human rights activist. How lucky was I? It's absurd. Yeah.
So after the arrest, you came home and then you decided to make a documentary.
No. I already had decided.
Oh,
yeah. So
but you didn't know how to fund it.
I announced a week before I got arrested that I was making Battleground Melbourne, and I was crowdfunding it, and I needed at least $65,000 just to make it at a minimum level, just for the hours that were going to be involved with my editing team and the studio time and all that stuff. And I'd launched the crowdfunder a week before. The first couple of days went well. I had 20 something thousand raised. But as these things do, the first couple of days go well and then it kind of peters off. And then you might get a boost in the last couple of days as well. So I was looking at going, oh, okay, I'm not really, not sure if this is going to get up or not. And then the arrest happens. And it was the most amazing thing. The arrest is actually, or the public reaction to the arrest is one of the things I'm just incredibly grateful for, because it warmed my heart. All of a sudden, every other alternative news channel out there is reporting on the arrest of Topher Field. Rukshan and Avi, even got a mention on Sky News and various other places. All of a sudden, so I left my phone at home when I got arrested. Thankfully, they didn't go through and clean up all the electronics or do any of that nonsense. So, like I said, I was very fortunate. So I left the phone at home, and my wife, between her phone and my phone, we're getting Senator Malcolm Roberts and George Christensen and a whole bunch of other we're getting journalists and we're getting all sorts of people that have my phone number sending messages. How can I help? What do you need me to do? We've just seen this on Rebel News. We've just seen this on Rukshan. What do you need from me? And that actually was a really beautiful sort of moment in the end, was coming home to all of that. And just getting that real sort of, money where your mouth is. Anyone can say nice things about you. Anyone can say, hey, I love your work. But in that moment, they didn't run away and go, oh, no, we don't know him. No, they stepped up and said, I'm going to give my time, my contacts, my effort, my expertise, whatever. What do you need? I'm here for you. Was really beautiful. Yeah.
So you were arrested. You announced you were going to make Battleground Melbourne. Why do you think it was important to make that documentary?
Yeah.
Because you took on a lot of financial risk. It obviously took its toll on you. You're already in a dark place, if I can describe it as that.
Yeah.
So why did you think, is it masochistic of you to do that?
I hadn't realized at that point where I was at. I've never had mental health struggles before, so I didn't notice my own symptoms, and I think it was essential that someone had to do it.
Yeah,
I think it's a story that had to be told. Full stop. It had to be told. And from my point of view, I sort of said, well, what does it take for someone to do this? Well, if someone's going to direct a documentary and tell this story and do it justice, they need to know what they're doing to direct a documentary. Okay, well, I've not done a feature-length documentary before, but I've done a bunch of short-form documentaries, and I've done short films and won awards for them in the past, in a past life, back in 2012, 13. So I know what I'm doing. That person also has to have the connections in the industry that are willing to help them on this project, even though it's politically counter-narrative. I have those contacts. This person has to have relationships with the people that you would want to interview. You know, the Arvies, the Ruckshans, the Monicas, the police officers, the politicians, the David Limbricks. You know, this person has to have those contacts. Well, I have those. This person has to be able to raise the budget. Well, I had an audience that I knew I could trust to be able to raise the budget to make this. And as I went through the list of, okay, well, someone's got to do this. Well, what does that someone look like? Okay, tick, 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 tick. And I kind of went, well, it's actually such a specific set of criteria, I might actually be the only person. Right? Not to say that someone else couldn't have done it better, but I just happen to have all of the necessary things that you had to have in order to do this. And I just kind of went, well, how can I not at that point? How can I not do this? So that was kind of why I just went, someone has to. I'm a someone. I'll be that someone. And I just kind of threw myself into it. And in a way, one of the biggest risks, one of the biggest dangers to the documentary was that I was going to get thrown in prison for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or who knows. And so when the arrest had kind of happened and I was out the same day, in a way, it was kind of like I was off the leash. That biggest fear and risk to the project was kind of eliminated at that point. And it actually, in many ways, it actually kind of freed me up a little bit. Yeah.
We were actually, I don't know if you remember, that last night we were talking about, we actually don't want to be in this position.
I hadn't drunk that much. I do remember.
We actually don't want to be in this position. And I really relate when you're saying, this person has to have this, this, and this. That's why I wear the taxi theft dress. That's why I'm here, because we don't want to be this person. And I think that's why people really relate to us, because we're reluctantly putting ourselves out there for the cause, because we believe the cause is bigger than us as individuals, but we want to do everything that we can to help the cause. And that's why I have so much time, respect, and love for you. And it's an honor to be here with you tonight. There's nowhere else in the world I would rather be than in David Limbrick's office, interviewing Topher Field on his own show. Now, Battleground Melbourne, I actually saw it for the first time this week in Morwell for a fundraiser for Rob McCarthy, who's our Eastern Victorian candidate. I apologise because I didn't realise how bad it was here. I was locked behind the iron ore curtain in Western Australia, so I had my own problems going on.
Yeah.
And I just want to say to you, thank you for documenting it, because you have documented a terrible part of Australia's history that we're going to look back on one day and be mortified about. And you're right, you're the only person that could do it. But for you personally, is it your greatest achievement, or is it something that you feel you just had to do? It's not really an achievement because of how dark it is. How would you describe it?
I am proud of it. And that's actually unusual for me. Typically for me, I have a hard time watching my own work because I see all the flaws, the mistakes, the faults, the things I could have done better, the lessons I've learned since then. And I certainly see those with this. It's by no means perfect, not even close. But I see and I understand the headwinds that we were up against making this doco. And for some reason with this particular project, I'm able to look at it and go, actually, given what we had to deal with in the making of this documentary and making this happen and all of the stuff that went on behind the scenes that you don't see, I'm really proud of what we achieved. You know, I had an incredible team, and most of them couldn't even put their name to it. You know, here's this internationally acclaimed multi-award winning documentary that they were a crucial part of, and they cannot even put their name to it. They cannot even put their hand up and say, yep, that was me. Thank you very much for the award. You know, it's so incredibly wrong. But I had an amazing team that worked with me. I had budget thanks to people that trusted me and put their faith in me. And I'm incredibly proud of what we achieved, which is, like I said, it's unusual for me. But I do just have this feeling of like, this is a documentary that just should not have had to be made. It just shouldn't exist.
Talk us a little bit about what happened behind the scenes. So you filmed this and you
start?
put it together when there were still restrictions going on. Last night you were telling me about how you had hired out this studio and it was raining and that's why you had the audio issues. But in terms of putting it, where do you even start?
Okay, so firstly, most of the industry won't touch us. Now, I'm aiming for studio, like cinema quality production values. This is not supposed to feel like an indie documentary. Of course, we're going to have issues with it. There's going to be challenges that aren't going to be full on Hollywood, right? It's $100,000 documentary, not a $10 million documentary, which many of them are. So it's always going to feel a little bit indie, but everywhere I could, I wanted to strive for the highest quality production values that I could achieve. And that meant using professional equipment, professional studios, professional crew that knew what they were doing and how to get the best out of the gear. But of course, most of them didn't want to touch us. The whole industry is extremely left-wing, very much pro-Daniel Andrews. And even the ones that aren't don't want to jeopardize their position within the industry because the whole industry runs on government grants. So why would they bite the hand that feeds them? So to make things more complicated, we had various stages of lockdown over the course of production, everything from, you can't leave your 5Ks all the way through to you can leave your 5Ks, but you're not allowed to go to a workplace unless you've been vaccinated. The rules varied over the course of the months of production. And we were not in compliance with those rules at any point in time. But of course, that means you go to a professional, you go to South Melbourne Dockland Studios with a proper sound stage and you say, hey, I want to rent out one of your smaller sound stages for a week. Well, you have to comply with every single one of the rules. So we ended up having to go with what was actually a photography studio, not a film studio, and it didn't have soundproofing. And as luck would have it, we were filming for 6 days, 6 12-hour days in the studio with all the different interviews that you see in the documentary. 22 hours of actual recorded interview in the end. That's what I had to cut down to make the doco. And it bucketed rain for, I think, the first 2.5 days of the 6 in studio, 6 12-hour days, and it bucketed rain. And it's most noticeable with Rukshan's voice. You can hear over the course of the documentary that his voice sounds different at different points. And that's because the rain was more or less intense and we had to do more or less to EQ that out of his voice. And that sort of means you lose all your bass tones or you lose all your trebles and the voice just doesn't quite sound natural. And it was just because we couldn't get access to a professional film studio. We were stuck with just whatever we could get. The other thing that really, really complicated things was the fact that we didn't even know the ending to the documentary that we were making. I was trying to get the documentary done well and truly in time for the federal election. And that meant just proceeding and just pushing ahead. And I'm doing all these interviews and we're talking all about the permanent pandemic powers. But actually, when I was doing the interviews, we didn't know what the result of the vote was. It hadn't happened yet. And while we were in studio was when everyone began to realize, hang on, the police have backed off now. They're not cracking heads anymore. And so all of a sudden now I'm like, okay, I want to get a film crew out into one of these protests because I wasn't going to put a film crew in harm's way, if it was still the rubber bullets and all the rest of it. But now it's like, okay, I want to get a film crew out to one of these protests. And I ended up having to write 4 different alternate endings, and we filmed 4 different alternate endings. And if you listen to my speech that I gave, not the week I mentioned before, the 20th of November, but if you look at the speech from the 27th of November, that speech had parts of it that was specifically written to be part of one of the alternate endings, right? That speech wasn't entirely for the crowd that was there on the day. It was actually partly for if we needed that as one of the alternate endings in the documentary. We had to make alternate endings for if the bill failed, for if it passed, and then for a couple of other variables in terms of how people kind of responded to each of those outcomes. All on spec, all in real time, all making it up as we go along, all with the risk of arrest. We were just constantly waiting for the cops just to show up at the studio. We thought one of the neighbors, it was in an industrial area, but with like one of the neighbors is going to be like, what's going on there? We were just waiting for it to happen. And so it was under those conditions and so many other things that went on. Quite literally too many to mention, but it was just, that's why I think I know the headwinds, I know what we were up against and the mountains we had to move behind the scenes to make it happen. And I think that's why, happily, and I'm glad this is the case, but it's unusual for me. I look at it and I go, I can see all of its flaws. I can see all of the things I would love to do differently if I had another chance, but I'm still proud of it. I'm still incredibly proud of what we did. And I say we deliberately. My team obviously told that story. But this city wrote the story. I didn't write it. I picked which bits I could fit and how to craft that narrative. But ultimately, I'm just telling a story that was written by this city. I'm just incredibly proud of it.
Talking of bits that you missed or you couldn't include, is there anything from the production of it that you wish you could include but didn't or couldn't have? Is there anything missing that you would love to just insert?
So many things. How can you tell a 2-year story in a state with 6.5 million people in 100 minutes? You just can't. I mean, we're sitting here in Tim Quilty's office. He's got this lovely picture here that was drawn by somebody with "Open the parks and let kids play," the signs that David and Tim held up on the steps of this very Parliament House. What a great moment! What a great action! Didn't make it in the documentary, you know. And another thing related to these guys, the Parliament in Exile didn't make it in. So many things didn't make it in, and probably the most common thing that people are mostly very, very grateful for the documentary. But if someone's going to criticize it or ask questions, the question is going to be, why didn't you include X?
Needed more Tim Quilty.
Well, look,
my feedback
would have been great.
I know,
but the bottom line was the vast majority of the story was going to remain untold. It's just the nature of making a feature-length documentary about a 2-year period of time like this. And so with apologies to everyone whose stories didn't get told and who feel it's unfair that I spent this much time telling Monica's story, but you didn't spend any time telling mine. Okay, but I had to craft a narrative. I had to tell a story in such a way that whether it was a Melbourneite who lived it or whether it's someone in Alaska who couldn't find Melbourne on a map, they can watch this and connect with it and find characters that they resonate with and they identify with and stories that get them at that emotional level, because it's not about the data and the timeline, it's about the emotion. And I prioritized that, and as a result, there's a lot that just didn't get told. And I'm trying to get more people's stories told through Battleground Melbourne Live, which I got to do at CPAC. So if you go to the Topher Field YouTube channel, you'll find that just a few videos old, actually on Facebook as well, just a few videos ago, Battleground Melbourne Live at CPAC. And that was myself, Crystal Mitchell, who is in the doco, Matt Lawson, who's mentioned in the doco, but we were supposed to interview him, but he got sick. That was like, there were so many things that just like, there were multiple people that were supposed to be interviewed that I had specific story points written around. So in the documentary, you'll see the Bearcat, and you'll see there's a shot of the Bearcat where a bunch of armored anti-terror police jump off the Bearcat and they're running towards the guy with the camera. That guy with the camera is Michael Gray Griffith from Cafe Lockdown. He was supposed to be interviewed in the documentary to talk about what happened on Elizabeth Street on that particular morning. He fell sick, couldn't get interviewed. Now I don't have I don't have anyone else who was there who can give me the eyewitness account. And so that part of the story ends up getting minimized in the edit, right? And then people are like, oh, why weren't you talking more about what happened on Elizabeth Street? Well, I tried, mate. You know, but there's just so many variables at play. And you're just, there's a saying in the industry, there's actually a book written in the film industry, every film is a miracle. The fact that there's so many moving parts and they're so freaking complicated, it's a miracle that any movie ever gets made. Now, obviously they do. But yeah, in a situation like this with so many variables and so many moving parts, it was just like herding cats. It was just, you get one back into the basket and two more have jumped out. You know, someone's called in sick, I can't do my interview. And it's not only I'm missing an interview, I'm looking at the story that I've written and the part of that story that they were supposed to be the anchor for. And I don't have that. And now I'm rewriting the story to fit the fact that that person's sick, etc. It's just, yeah, it was a really, really intense period of time with my unrecognized sort of emotional trauma that I was carrying that I hadn't noticed at that point in time. On top of that, and then just the physical, psychological fatigue of it all. And yeah, I mean, I kind of look back and go, yeah, it's no wonder I really kind of fell in a heap. Yeah.
You say herding cats, I call it herding libertarians.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Watching the movie back, is there a part of the movie or a segment that it really resonates with you, or you have to leave the room for? Is there any part of the movie that you just can't watch?
There's no part of the movie that I can't watch, but what a lot of people may not know is that there's a lot of shots that I wanted to use but chose not to because I was trying to avoid the MA rating. I got the MA rating anyway, so I should have just gone for it. But there was an awful lot of really confronting footage that hit the cutting room floor, and some really confronting stuff in the interviews.
More confronting than that image of the cops pepper spraying that old woman?
Yeah. there's some with apologies, some really fucked up shit happened, and some of it got caught on camera. And
can you tell us more about that? Or?
Well, some really explicit sort of images of people being shot with rubber bullets. You know, you'll notice the images, the angles that I've used. You really don't quite see. You know what's happened because of the context of what's being said, but you don't actually see the impact. You don't actually sort of see it happen. And that was by choice. That was deliberate. There are camera angles that you really see people copying it. And now I just wish I'd just gone hell for leather and just put it all in there and just gone for full shock value. But I was trying to sort of be, I guess, a little bit sensitive about it and trying to avoid the MA rating. But anyway, the part that I think there's probably two things that get me the most. And that is when Aaron tells his story about his attempted suicide, because he'd reached out to me. He was one of the people that reached out to me along the journey. You got me.
We knew this was going to happen. We cried a lot last night as well. We're very emotional people.
He was one of the people that reached out to me over the journey, and I just have so much time for him. He's come from a really bad place with a really bad childhood and family situation, and he's doing the work to be better for his kids, his stepson, for his partner. And he's just, once you're in the system, it's like the system just wants to keep you there, and he's just being dragged down at every single turn. And I know what he had done before that interview, and I've seen what he's done since, which is even more impressive. Like the way this guy is just clawing his way out of hell and into a better life for his kids is just so impressive. And so every time I watch that and think about how close we were to not having him, that hurts me every time, because I know that there's an awful lot of people where their story ended differently, and they weren't around for me to interview. And obviously I'm incredibly grateful that Aaron is, but there's a lot that aren't. And of the people that reached out to me, there's 4 that I know of that I lost. That nothing I could say or anyone else could say would change their mind. So Aaron's a big one. Aaron's a big one for me. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And if you haven't seen the movie yet, it is quite an emotional roller coaster, and I left the room just feeling guilty because I didn't realise how bad it got in Melbourne. As I said, I was in Western Australia and we had our own problems over there. And if you haven't seen Battleground Melbourne, you should, because it's an important thing to remember. And we have an election around the corner. And I know since I've been here, I've had a lot of people say, oh, we don't want to talk about it. It's like PTSD. We don't want to talk about what we went through. We don't want to talk about the curfew. We don't want to talk about how we were locked in our homes. We just don't want to talk about it. Okay, if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But please remember what they did to you. When you go to vote at the election in November, remember who stood up for you. It was David Limbrick. It was Tim Quilty. Very few others. As we said at the start of this, we've been doing this before it was cool. We've been standing up for our principles and the principles of freedom before it was cool to be cancelled for it. So there's a lot of parties out there that have come to the table, and good on them. Good on them for trying to be part of change. But when you go to vote, just remember who stood up for you, and it was people like David Limbrick, Tim Quilty, and Topher Field. You've played such an incredible part in this liberty movement. You are an icon. I said this to you last night when I was very drunk and very whatever else, but to be sitting next to you and on the Senate lineup with you and David Limbrick, I'm so grateful as well. So thank you for indulging me and letting me take over slow chat, reverse slow chat.
You made me. You've ruined my mascara. No, look, thank you, and I do appreciate your work, your interest in what I do, and your willingness when the idea. I don't even remember whose idea it was, but the idea was floated last night.
It was mine because I said, "Has anyone actually asked you for your story?" I'm a journalist. That's my background. this is a very important story to tell. So thank you for letting me ask you the questions.
No, look, I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it. It's
needed more whiskey and needed more cigars. We couldn't smoke in Parliament House.
Smoke detectors.
You know, we're anarchists in suits, but we couldn't smoke in David Limbrick's office. We wouldn't go that far.
Well, look, we might have to do this again, but also I need to do a slow chat with you because there's an awful lot of people on this side of the continent that actually don't know who Lady Liberty is.
How could they not?
And they haven't seen your Instagram pictures wielding guns and shooting things in the
and
Nevada
my
desert.
Taxis theft dress,
an iconic look, mirrored off AOC in the US. Only much better. No, so look, this won't be the last time that you're going to appear on the Topher page, I hope. And thank you very much for having me.
Can I ask what's next? What's next for Topher Field?
So this is a problem because to quote the Joker, do I look like a man with a plan? I have always been following my nose. I didn't start doing videos because I had this bee in my bonnet that I wanted to be an influencer. I'm going to be YouTube famous. It's never been a thing for me. And so therefore it's kind of like, well, I don't have a bee in my bonnet. I don't have a vision for what I'm going to do and where I'm going to be in a few years' time. I kind of don't know. But what I do, I've reached the point where I realized, and I did a slow chat about this a while ago, I can't keep treating this Topher thing like it's a hobby. Okay, for two reasons. Number one, if I think that what I'm saying is actually important, then I should take it seriously enough to try and get more people to hear it. If I'm not going to take it seriously enough that I want to get more people to hear it, then is it really important? You know, it calls into question the whole importance of what I'm actually doing. So recognizing and realizing, actually, I need to take this seriously and I need to try and reach more people with what I do. But also, I'm no longer the 20-something-year-old single forklift driver that I was when I started. There are bills to pay. There's a retirement to think about in decades to come. There's real life, and I can't keep doing it for free. And I did it for free for over 10 years. 2009 is when I started. And so in the last year, I've sort of developed all the T-shirts and the hoodies. We've now got the Battleground Melbourne DVD. There's a Subscribe Star page. There's Brew Coffee. I'm trying to give people different ways where they can kind of get in and support what I do so that I can justify continuing to do it. So my focus, what I would love to have happen right now, so I'm working on the book. That won't be ready for a while yet. Books take time. And I'm not just going to smash something out and just go, oh, yeah, here you go. I'm going to do it right. So that's many, many more months before that's going to be even ready to go to a publisher for editing. But Battleground Melbourne Live, for me, that's the thing. If I could take that to the US or take that around Australia, I had the opportunity to do something like that and to get not just my story, but some of the other people who were there on the streets of Melbourne. And there's something about having the human being on the stage in front of you. Battleground Melbourne is a documentary. Is amazing. I'm proud of it. The stories are compelling. It's deeply emotional. But when you've got the human being on the stage in front of you, it's on another level. And the message of Battleground Melbourne Live is very, very simple. We are ordinary people who face extraordinary times and made the decision that we were going to stand for what was right, even when our government was wrong. And it's that decision that's the key thing that sets us apart. We're not special people in any way, shape, or form. I'm not special in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that differentiates me from all the other people whose names you've never heard because they never stood up was a decision. That's the only thing that differentiates me and you and David and Tim and all, and Monica and Avi and Rukshan, etc. And then the list goes on. All of these people whose names you know, the reason you know their name is because they made a decision that was different to all the other sheep around them. And that's the message of Battleground Melbourne. We are ordinary people, but we made a decision to stand for what was right. And I want to take that message worldwide because we haven't seen the last of the madness. COVID might be sort of on the tail end now, but the mandates are still in place, etc. But this is not the end of the madness by any stretch of the imagination. We're heading for really rough times economically, and that's going to lead to people proposing all kinds of absurd solutions to fix that problem that are just going to make it worse. And as a result, we need to be out there loud and clear with really clear messages saying, hey guys, these are the lessons that we ought to be learning. And we know that from personal experience because we were there. Listen to our stories. And so I want to take Battleground Melbourne Live international if I can, but at the very least national. But at this point in time, there's no plans. I need a promotion company or someone to get alongside that to make that happen. Hey, if you're watching, but that's what I would like to do, because I think those stories, the Battleground Melbourne live stories, that's probably the next chapter for me, and then the Good People Break Bad Laws book after that.
What about personally, though? I know last night you were saying you were getting a little bit triggered by coming into this city, and I apologise for inviting you to have a drink with me because it is triggering. But
yeah.
What about personally?
Look, I'm in counselling. I'm not going to be shy about saying that. I'm in counselling. I'm carrying battle damage. I just am. And there's a lot of us that are. And I think for me, there's a lot of people out there that will put up a social media, frame around their thing. It's okay to not be okay. It ain't weak to speak, blah, blah, blah. But the minute you, as someone on sort of the freedom side of this issue, the minute you speak up publicly about mental health challenges, about the impact that it's had on you, what you get back is mockery and belittling and being called weak, and people doing all the things that they say in their little hashtags that they wouldn't do. They pile in. And so it's kind of like, it ain't weak to speak unless I don't like your politics. It's okay to not be okay unless I don't like your politics. And at that point, I'll pile in, right? That's the reality of a lot of people. And so I've made the decision that I'm going to be really sort of public with my own journey. There are people that speak up about mental health challenges after they've sort of resolved them, and that's fine. That's their choice. I've made the decision that I'm going to talk about it as I'm working through it, because I know that I'm not the only one. In fact, I was very lucky in many respects. There would be other people out there carrying a lot more trauma than what I've got and having to deal with that. And so I kind of want to set the example of saying, hey guys, it ain't weak to speak. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be someone that people look up to for whatever reason, and still as that person say, hey guys, I'm actually not okay. I'm actually struggling. There's stuff that's not okay inside my head and inside my world right now. So I'm in counselling, and I'm just working my way through stuff slowly. I've got amazing people around me. Every day is different. The biggest struggle for me is actually the anxiety. Decompressing. I found myself, you hear a chopper go over the house after having been at enough of the protests. Choppers are the ubiquitous sound of every protest. There are multiple police choppers, particularly as the violence escalated. Those choppers, they were always in the air. From the minute you stepped out of the train or the car or however it was, you were getting close to the city and you started walking your way in, playing dodge and cops, as I used to call it. The sound of the chopper was with you from then until you got out. There's stuff that just kind of stays with you to a certain degree. And I know I'm not the only one, and I know I didn't have it bad compared to others. There are others that just went through hell compared to me. And I just want to set an example and just say, hey guys, it's okay. It's okay. And every day is going to be different. Some days are going to be better than others. And sometimes you're going to fuck up. And sometimes you're going to lash out, and sometimes you're going to need time and just go quiet. And that's okay, because that's all part of it. Just be honest with yourself and admit to yourself that you do need to be talking to somebody, and you do need to be working your way through this, because bottling it up is not the right solution. So, yeah, for me personally, I'm trying to heal. Battleground Melbourne cinema tours have been amazing for that. I'm so grateful to all the people that have showed up. They've done me a world of good. Everyone that's come along, you've done me a world of good. Just seeing all of your faces and hearing all of your feedback and responses has done me a world of good in the last couple of months. I'm in a much better place than I was. Still a long way to go, but I didn't realize until it was too late. Not too late, but I didn't realize until it was very late in the game just how dark my headspace had got. And I'm just slowly walking my way back out of that.
I said at the start of the show you had 3 questions that you could ask. You already asked one of David Limbrick.
Yeah.
Is there 2 questions that you would like to ask yourself that I've missed?
Wow. Ask myself. I didn't expect that. Okay. You've covered things really well, actually.
Thank you. I'm going to use that on myself CV.
Yeah. No, you've covered things really well. Goodness. Nothing springs to mind.
Well, can I ask
done an
just about the
annoyingly good
Senate
job.
campaign, because
Yeah, okay.
we were both
Yeah.
lead Senate candidates along with David Limbrick.
Yep.
I heard you on one of your slow chats call it a mistake, I think, to have run.
And that language was probably a little bit strong. Sorry.
Yeah, you're fine.
To be fair, that was probably not the right mistake.
Because you
I
were a
think is too
fantastic
strong.
candidate, Topher.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
Between
that.
you and me, we had it covered. And David Limbrick, of course. But, you know, we were the most exciting lead Senate candidates the Liberal Democrats have ever had.
The fact that Victoria did not send David Limbrick to Canberra is a crime.
Yeah.
It is a crime. What's wrong with you?
Because we need him in Victoria.
Well, we do. We do need him in Victoria. We do. But seriously, what is wrong with us? So I said yes. I ran the campaign. I'm the way I'm wired. I can't do things by halves. So once I say yes, of course I'm going over there and campaigning on the ground. I had some amazing supporters who have become friends. Volunteered a bus, and their whole family jumped in their bus. We got a sign written. They jumped on the Spirit of Tassie and took it over to Tasmania and spent 3 weeks on the road with me. My family came with me. It was an amazing experience, and many things to be thankful for. Tasmania is great. If you haven't been to Tassie, get to Tassie. Tasmania is genuinely a brilliant part of Australia. Although sometimes I think they wish they weren't part of Australia. They could just be their own, a little bit like WA.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's genuinely brilliant. But it was a really interesting time for me, because on the one hand I was busy, and being busy often helps your headspace, right? You've just got things to do, things to focus on, the next. And that was a really busy time for me. But that was also the time when I finally began to decompress, because I had all the intensity of the lockdowns, waiting for the arrests, all of that. And then I rolled straight into the documentary. Then I launched the documentary. The audio wasn't right. We got that fixed, the relaunch of the documentary. And then I was rolling pretty much straight into a federal Senate campaign, which, like I said, I can't do by halves. I'm going to go all out. And it was while I was in Tassie that I just began to notice and realize I'm not me. This is not the same person that I was in 2019. I'm an instinctively optimistic person. I'm very optimistic about the future. Sometimes not the near future, but certainly the medium to long-term future of humanity. I'm tremendously optimistic. And I was starting to get really dark, really cynical. There are people working their asses off to help me, and I'm starting to get irritable and angry, and I live my life as much as I can in a position of gratitude towards others, and that was disappearing, and I wasn't able to maintain that.
Oh yes, I've just seen that.
A democracy sausage in front of the
I lost it when I was in WA, and I saw that. He was eating a sausage in front of the Animal Justice Party sign, which had a cow on it.
It was a democracy sausage. Come on. And that was really when I first began to go, man, who am I now? Because I'm not the person I was in 2019. So who am I? And that was what then began, the process. And of course, as someone with no history of mental health issues at all, it takes a little while for you to come to terms with the idea that it's you this time, And I had very little exposure to mental health issues until I was in my 20s. Mid-20s was really the first time I had any exposure to someone that really had, genuine mental health issues. And so it wasn't something that I understood well. And even that person in my 20s, like I fucked up all sorts of things trying to be a part of their life. Because I didn't get it, I didn't understand, and so I sort of carried that into now my own challenges, and it's taken me a little while to kind of go, okay, stop trying to make it make sense. Stop sitting there going, this gives me massive anxiety. Why? It makes no sense. Why can't I open my email inbox right now? I just can't bring myself. I get up and I go to the toilet and I sit down and I'm about to do it, and then I get up and make myself a cup of tea, and I sit down with a cup of tea and I'm about to do it. I get up and do. Why can't I open a freaking email inbox right now? And having the realization of stop trying to make it make sense. It doesn't make sense. This is a self-protection mechanism. This is your body hitting the override switch because you've exceeded its limits in certain ways. Your psychological capacity for stress, trauma, something or other has been exceeded, and your brain, your psyche is hitting the bailout button, and it doesn't make sense. And so that was a journey for me to actually almost reach a certain level of self-acceptance. I'm letting myself down. I'm letting my family down. This is not how I want to live long term. I'm not making excuses for it. But as a season, as a chapter, while you're working through the trauma and you're working through the issues and you're processing and you're finding a place to, but it's like my counselor put it very well. It's like someone's come into your house and just flipped absolutely everything, emptied every single drawer, and just turned everything upside down. And it's a mess inside your head. And there's stuff from decades ago, and there's stuff from yesterday, and there's nothing makes sense, and it's out of order and it's jumbled. And you've just got to go through piece by piece and find things and put them back where they belong. And that's what the process of being with a counsellor is. You're sort of talking through whatever it is that's really bugging you this week, or whatever it is that's really affecting you, and talking through that, and then finding where does that belong, right? And then you put it where it belongs, and then you're able to move through to the next things. And it's a hell of a process, but it's necessary. You can't just blunder on, ignoring the fact that your house has been turned upside down. You can't just pretend that nothing happened. You've got to go through, and as painful as it is, and as slow as it is, you've got to go through and have a look. And so that's what I'm in the process of doing. And I'm not going to apologize for that. If people want to laugh, if people want to mock, if people want to judge, you do you, right? I'm going to do the same thing that I've done all the way through this pandemic and for a long time before. I'm going to speak my mind. I'm going to say what I believe to be true. I'm going to say the things that I believe matter. And I'm going to do it regardless of whether it's going to grow my audience or shrink my audience, or people are going to like me or people are going to hate me. That's never been a consideration for me. I'm going to say it because it's true, and because out there somewhere is someone who needs to hear it.
They say you should never talk about politics and religion, but we've talked about both of those tonight. One last question, because we have one on the list left. Mm-hmm. Who are you going to vote for?
Well, without a word of a lie, I know I'm sitting in David Limbrick's office, but without a word of a lie, I'll be voting below the line. So I won't be allowing the group voting tickets to interfere. I'll be voting below the line in both the upper and the lower house. And I will be putting whoever my local upper and lower house Liberal Democratic Party members are at number one. And then I've got a sort of a list of others that I will work my way through. What I will be doing is I will be putting the Liberals on my list. So you're not obliged to, okay? You can stop after, depending, the houses are different, but you don't have to number every single one. So you could, in theory, leave off all the major parties if you wanted to. I will be putting the Liberals last, but they will be on my ticket. And that's simply because, it's not because I think they're any better. I think they're a bunch of gutless cowards. I think they've been worse than useless.
Well, they kicked David and Tim out of Parliament.
Well,
so.
Yeah. And I say they've been worse than useless deliberately. Useless means that they've not had usefulness. They've not done anything good, but they've also not been bad. They've actually been bad because they've taken up oxygen and taken up space away from the people that really were engaged in the fight and trying to make a difference. If you have a look now, I've got a React video coming out in the next week or so. The Liberal Party sent out an email saying, we're gonna have a royal commission, and there's never going to be more lockdowns, and there's never going to be more.
They copied the Lib Dems policy.
And I just read it and I went, where the fuck were you 2 years ago when this would have made a difference, right? You left us out there getting the shit beat out of us by the cops, and you never said boo. And now, a month out from election, you want to like, that I am angry about that. So I don't think for a second that the Liberal Party are going to be better than the Labor Party, but I will still put them at the bottom of my ticket, where Labor won't be on there at all, okay? But they'll be at the bottom, because as much as the Liberal Party would be no better, what does it say about us if after everything that the Labor Party have done and everything that Danielle Andrews has done, we don't kick them out?
I despair for the future of Victoria if they get back in. But like you said, what's the alternative?
Well, yeah, and this is the real tragedy of politics in Australia today, is that we just don't have a major party, a party of government, as they like to call themselves. that actually has any principles left. I mean, even at the CPAC conference, we saw the Liberal Party panel being booed by conservatives. They're yelling out, "You betrayed us," from the audience to these people, Nick Cater and Amanda Stoker. And these are perfectly good people in their own right, people that I have time for. But the party as a whole has become worse than useless. Worse than useless. And that's a reality that they need to face up to and face up to quick. And if they're not going to do it, then my hope is that the Liberal Democratic Party take their place. Because they are a party of principle. They are a party where they bring everything back to a set of clear principles, and that is their litmus test. And that's what we need. That's what we needed the Liberal Party to be for the last couple of years, and they've failed miserably. And if they're not going to step up real freaking quick, and I think it's already too late, to be honest, I'll be voting Liberal Democratic Party number one, regardless. But we need principles back.
Well, you're bringing principles back. You're bringing sexy back.
Well, low standards, but okay. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Thank you so much for letting me take over Slow Chat tonight, Topher. Like I said before, I was in the shop buying whiskey tonight to be on Slow Chat as the host. It's a dream come true. I'm honoured to be in Melbourne. I'm here until the election at least. Please don't send me back to Western Australia. Can I be a refugee in Victoria? I don't know. But thank you very much. You're a hero. You're an inspiration. Everything you've done for this movement, I've admired you from afar for so long, and to be sitting here with you tonight and drinking and smoking with you last night, I'm like a little giddy schoolgirl again. But I hope to come back on your show one day.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do another reverse slow chat, because your story, honestly, that's why I said to you last night, we need to tell Topher Field's story.
Well, I need to do an actual slow chat with you.
You're more important.
And tell the Kate Fantanel story, the Lady Liberty story. But look, it's been a pleasure, and thank you. And because you are the host, I have to let you close out the show.
Well, thank you for joining us. My name is Kate Fantanel, or Lady Liberty. I've been here with Topher Field tonight. And if you want to support the Liberal Democrats, please visit our website. I know this is your show, but I have to plug the party, my party, your party, David Limbrick's party. vic.ldp.org.au is where you go to help. And thank you again. Hope to see you again soon. Good night.